us. I hope you've enjoyed the sushi, although you've got a Subway and I feel like we failed you on sushi front. I apologise.
All right, no worries.
I apologise. So hello everyone, my name is Amy, for anyone that doesn't know me. I work here at ThoughtWorks. This is our office. Thank you for the sushi and the wine, ThoughtWorks, nice one. So just wanted to let you know a little bit about the group. I don't know how many people have been to these meetups before, but this is the Ladies Who Code meetup. I'm one of the co-organisers with a number of other people who bring this to you once a month. So I just wanted to kind of let you know a little bit of context about the event tonight. So we have got Bex, who is not going to be speaking, but is here. We've got Farouk, we've got Holly, and we've got Chris. And they all work for a company called Reason Digital. Back in March of this year, Bex attended one of our events and gave a lightning talk about an app that Reason Digital had been working on to keep sex workers safe. And everyone was like, 5 minutes isn't enough. We don't know enough about this project. We need to know more. So Bex and the team kindly agreed to come along and tell us a little bit more about the ins and outs of the project from a design development and a kind of commercial business sort of point of view. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, we'll be having a Q&A afterwards, but I'll hand over to Farouk and you can take it from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, Ladies Who Code and not Ladies Who Code as well, but things. Thanks for coming here. As you just heard, obviously this is, we've got 3 talks coming up about an app that we've been working on for some time called Safety Nets. So the plan is that, this is me by the way, I'm Farouk, I'm the CEO at Reason Digital. Holly is one of our digital designers and Chris is a developer specifically with mobile expertise, so he's really well placed to talk about the technical aspects. I'm going to fairly quickly try and run through and kind of contextualize this whole project. So, you know, why we did it, what it's all about, how we've got where we've got to. And then I'm going to hand over to these guys because they actually know what they're talking about. So very quickly. So, yeah, sex, murder, rape and apps. This safety net, as if you'd heard Bex's talk, that I haven't, but I'm assuming you kind of outlined it. This is fundamentally an app to protect and keep safe sex workers. And this is created in-house at Reason Digital. I'm not going to turn this into a plug for Reason Digital, but just as a really brief overview, we are based in the Northern Quarter. There's almost 40 of us there. We are a digital agency, a full-service digital agency from front-end, back-end, design, UX, strategy, but we have a fundamental difference to other digital agencies in that we are not like another commercial agency. We only work on projects that do social good. So we work with charities, we work with not-for-profits, we work with companies for their CSR, and that's the kind of underlying theme. We don't really work. We're not interested in doing e-commerce sites for commercial businesses because they don't have a positive social impact, and we find them fairly boring as well, quite frankly. So that's a lovely shot of our offices in the Northern Quarter. We've worked with a really wide range of clients, you know, really big clients like the BBC, the WWF, Virgin Unite, which is the fundraising arm of the whole Virgin Empire, through to smaller charities. You know, our clients range from 2-3 person operations to vast multinational corporations, effectively. There's a few over there. And so let's talk about Safety Net, which is this app that we're focusing on today. So this really started from an in-house innovation process. One of the things we're quite proud of, the reason is that we allow staff the time to come up with ideas, and where possible, we try and develop them into something really tangible. So it's not just vaporware, you know, it's not just kind of crazy digital ideas. And one thing that was, you know, in the news at the time was prostitution and sex workers. A couple of years ago, I think a paranoid schizophrenic went on the rampage in Manchester and violently attacked and quite seriously injured 3 people in the space of a number of hours. So there is this underlying social issue that needed to be tackled. We are all about really using digital technology, using digital good to tackle issues, whether it's homelessness, whether it's a lack of donations for a particular charity. And in this case, it's about the welfare and the well-being of sex workers. There are approximately 80,000 sex workers in the UK. Most are based in London, but there's lots in Manchester, there's lots in Bristol, there's lots in Glasgow. So there is a huge potential user base, and there's, more importantly, I think, a huge number of very vulnerable, very exposed, and very marginalized people out there. As you know, since austerity kicked in from about 2010 onwards, it's been very, very hard for less affluent, more marginalized groups of society. And sex workers, people have this image of what a prostitute might be, but actually our research showed that this is a really wide-ranging catchment area. So, for example, there's this article in The Guardian about lots of students turning to sex work to supplement the fact that they're paying these, amazingly onerous sort of fees and, maintenance and living expenses on top of that. So they're not who you might think they are. And, as I said before, it's really, regardless of your views on sex workers and prostitution and related things, it's an amazingly dangerous place to be. You might remember the case of the Suffolk Strangler, who killed 4 or 5 people, I think, in very quick succession. And because his victims were essentially people who had no support networks, who had no access to real-time information and alerts, he was able to kill a whole bunch of people before the police investigation had even got into gear. So, that is another example of really pressing, kind of really immediate and really horrific social issue. And that aside, the cost to humanity aside, there is a cost to the state as well. So on average, a rape investigation costs around £100,000. And again, at a time of austerity, this is another burden that we can probably do without. This money could go elsewhere potentially, were there a better way to mitigate the risks to these sex workers. And this is kind of the support network, the information system that these guys relied on. Notice boards, very analog, very physical, very old school, in a number of drop-in locations. This is a really inefficient network. It's everything that's digital should be there to prevent. So you have these kind of isolated, inefficient, analog paper-based networks and word of mouth, and it's not what you need when potentially there's a serial killer looking to kill sex workers. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And within Reason Digital, when we started off this project, we started looking at what was happening in the app space and the tremendous disruption that was happening. Uber is an amazing example of how an app has totally revolutionized, disrupted, destroyed in many cases an existing industry that was characterized by inefficiency, a lack of comms, etc., etc. So that's great, and it shows what digital can do. However, with our kind of ethos and our principles in mind, we wanted to see how we could use the amazing advancements made in the app space and turn it into something that we could apply here. So, the fundamental idea of SafetyNet is to have a safe, secure, closed network, and people can be relayed these messages in real time, which is exactly the opposite of the previous model, where we relied on so many different factors that you might not even know anything. So this was really the sort of the core idea behind SafetyNet, the idea of instantaneous, real-time, fairly detailed, but really, really immediate alerts. And in doing this, we partnered with the National Ugly Mug Scheme, who really, that old analog notice board I showed you about, these guys have been at the coalface working with sex workers for years and years, and they've developed, they have this understanding of the industry. They can reach out to that community, which is very hard to reach out to. And so they've been really useful partners with us. Obviously, these things cost money. So we were, in the first instance, funded by the Nominate Trust, who gave us enough money to create a prototype. We then got bridge finance to take it a little bit further. And quite recently, we've been fortunate enough to get funding also from the foundation and also Comic Relief. So that will hopefully allow us to sort of roll this out further and take this further and hopefully impact on more people's lives in a good way. I'm not going to get too far into the design and technical process because that's what Holly and Chris are going to talk about. But a couple of quick kind of takeaways from that. We found that the sex worker industry is fairly diverse, amazingly varied. So sex workers in Manchester, in that grim and fairly insalubrious kind of underpass thing over there, are very different from an escort working in South Kensington, where houses go for, you know, £10 million upwards. That was quite interesting because obviously those guys have access to old phones, old versions of Android, old versions of iOS. These people are early adopters. They all have iPhone 6s and 6 Pluses. They're you know, so we had to make something that covered all those bases. So backwards compatibility was quite interesting. Chris is probably going to talk a little bit about that, maybe, if you fancy it. And this is what it looks like. So currently, SafetyNet is being used by a limited number of sex workers in Greater Manchester, and we are sort of obviously getting their feedback and monitoring how the performance is going. The next stage of the project is really to roll it out nationally to greater numbers. London is an obvious choice because something like 90% of sex workers and unbelievably 98% of escorts are actually based in London. So that is somewhere where, you know, you'll get some really meaningful, interesting feedback as well. But it's great that it started in Manchester, of course. Here's a short animation, I think. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but it kind of gives you some sneezing in the background whilst that was made. But you know, there is an element of sort of location awareness there. People can specify what they want to put into the alerts, and yeah, you get the general idea. This goes on for ages, so I'm just going to get past it. We've been fortunate enough to have really good feedback on the, you know, the early stages of this project. So we were in the Metro, that talked quite highly about us. Vice, that's like the most Vice type headline ever. So it's so zeitgeistic. But it's great, and you know, that was Vice.com as well. So that took us beyond, you know, beyond Manchester, beyond Britain, and more globally. And there's interestingly, there's some really interesting sort of animated conversation on Twitter from Americans on both sides of the moral fence around that. And Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, said that we were very cool, which in itself is kind of very cool, hopefully. So that hopefully is a useful introduction. I know we're having a panel later, so we can answer more questions, but I'm going to hand over to Holly now, who's going to talk in more detail about the design process that led to getting from those very early kind of wandering around underpasses, talking to sex workers, to that. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry.
That's the bit I was most nervous about, to be honest. So, I'm Holly, and that was my heavy breathing you could hear in that recording of Safety Nets. So I'm one of the designers of Safety Nets. There's a couple of us, but I mostly worked on the visual design, but I had a hand in the research and the wireframing process as well. So I just want to talk you through a couple of things I thought were most interesting about designing Safety Nets. So what did our design research lead us to find? Initially, nothing, basically. I didn't find anything that really mirrored what we were trying to achieve, which was pretty cool because it meant we were creating something new, but it was also kind of scary because we were creating something new. So my first and most obvious port of call was to look at existing safety apps. But these, well, they're all really about the individual's safety, and they use predefined contacts or professional services to keep one person safe, which is obviously amazing and has a really great purpose, but that didn't really help us. Here's some more of them. They're all my friends. We needed to create a community and to connect people who were similar but potentially unknown to each other. So as I was sat on the train on the way to work one morning, one of my sadly most used apps really jumped out at me. So Tinder, I'm sure most people are aware now, is a dating app, and it uses your location and predefined settings such as gender and mutual interests to match you with people that you might want to talk with. So if you can imagine those people are actually notifications, then you can maybe see why that excited me. From a user interface point of view, dating apps actually share a lot with what we needed to achieve. In essence, there's the settings. In essence, they're simple interfaces that filter people or messages to allow you to connect with those who also want to hear from you. And our research showed us that that was something that was really, really important to the users of safety nets. A male sex worker wouldn't really want to see notifications from a female sex worker, and the same, someone in Manchester wouldn't really care about what was happening in London unless they were going to go there. But yeah. So a lot of the UX and UI inspiration that's gone in safety nets has actually come from dating apps, which for a safety app for sex workers, that's something that I never really imagined happening. So I just want to talk about a few of the design challenges, and well, the three that I think were the most important. First of all was the colour scheme. So there's many, many types of sex work, but there's really one group that we had in mind when we were deciding on the colour scheme. A lot of street workers are active at night, and yeah, so we don't really expect users to send an alert while they're in immediate danger. We imagine they'd probably move away, but we have to be considerate of the fact that they might. And a bright screen lighting up someone's face in a dark street could put them in real, like, life-threatening danger. So while light being emitted is inevitable, we try to eliminate it as much as possible by using a dark theme for the app, which is such a simple decision, but it really is genuinely something that could save someone's life. So there, I'm proud of us for thinking of that. The second issue that I found really interesting was gender. So gender and sex are really delicate subjects, and we're becoming ever more aware of prescribing them in user interface design. But for safety nets, as I mentioned before, it's really something we need to filter by. It's incredibly important. And it sounds like a simple task, but we need to be really sensitive when we're talking about these things, especially around wording and icons. The three groups that we needed to accommodate were male, female, and transgender. Male and female are really obvious. These symbols are ingrained and they're recognized worldwide. But transgender isn't so widely understood, but more importantly, people identify in so many different ways. And really, we're trying to group a really diverse range of people into an icon, which is hard. So this is not a subject I'm an expert in by any means. So we turned to Manchester Action on Street Health, who we also worked with a little in this project. And they didn't have an answer either. So armed with what research we had, and basically some common sense, this is the icon we chose. And I mean, I don't really think it's a perfect solution. And I think this is one of the things where I'm hoping we get a lot of feedback on, because the users really, really need to lead us on this. And if anyone's looking at this and thinking we've made some awful, awful mistake, then please let me know. So the last point, and probably what I think is the most important, is mapping location. One of the biggest parts of safety nets is location, and it's absolutely vital that users can see attacks that are close to them. Without it, it would just be this endless stream of notifications that were mostly useless and people wouldn't use it. But there is obviously an issue with sharing exact locations, especially for those who work from home or work for a business. They need to keep those locations private. So our solution was this. This is the view when you are creating an alert, and this is when you're looking at an alert. The big grey circle is actually the map pin. and which is fixed in place. It was shown on the video before, and you move the map underneath the pin. So the pin obviously has a center that where a location is recorded, but we're really trying to encourage the users to be vague about it, which we're doing by using language like, you don't need to be exact, and as well as the map being sort of quite zoomed out by default. And of course, the massive pin with the faded edges. And I'm actually wondering, and this is a complete theory, but if this map pin that's static and stuck in front of the map is going to maybe create this barrier where almost a physical barrier, so users don't zoom in too much when they're selecting a location. But I've really got no idea, and I guess we'll see that in our feedback. And that is everything. And I will pass you to Chris now, who's going to talk about code and lots of things I don't really understand.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a developer that works at Reason Digital. I work mainly in .NET and also in iOS development. So I was involved with the iOS implementation of safety nets. And I'm basically going to give you a brief insight into the technical side of the safety nets app, also called the NUN app. We developed for two different operating systems, iOS and Android. Being an iOS developer, I'm going to focus more on the iOS side of the development. With iOS projects, these days you have a choice of two different programming languages. First of all, you've got Objective-C, which is a legacy language that was released in the 1980s, and it's been used to develop Mac, OS X software and iOS software since its inception in the 2000s. And now these days, we've also got Swift, which is a new development language that was released in 2013. And that's intended as a sequel to Objective-C. So we had to make a choice between the two. We decided to go with Swift, primarily because it gives us a chance to learn new skills, bring new skills in-house. And it's also, as it's intended as a sequel to Objective-C, it is faster and it's more concise and more readable. And as I say, it expands our in-house skill set as well. The downside of using Swift is there's less online material for us to reference. If you have a problem, you basically have to do a lot more digging around to find a solution to your any development issues you might face. We did use some Objective-C libraries as well within the project, as you can use the two together because there's a lot of general libraries out there for iOS that are still only written in Objective-C. So there is some Objective-C code in the project as well. We had to choose which supported hardware and software we wanted. It supports the 4S, all generations of the iPhone 5, the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, and it supports iOS 7, 8, and it will do 9 as well, because 9 will be released when we're looking to pilot safety nets, when we release it. It does support Android as well. It's generally the latest 3 versions of Android. In terms of data, which was a big part of this project, we chose to use Parse as our data platform for safety nets. Parse is a cloud-based application platform for mobile applications, and we chose to use that partly because we're not hosting experts, and it prevents developers like myself from having to maintain servers and infrastructure. It's good to go, and it's cloud-based. So we used Parse for the data side of this project. I'm going to run through a few of the challenges that we faced implementing safety nets. The first one is user data. We weren't looking to create a new user base because ugly mugs are basically we're using their user data, their user base. Basically, you have to be a registered Ugly Mugs user in order to use safety nets, and you have to remain an Ugly Mugs user in order to use the safety nets app. So we used, because it's a WordPress site that the Ugly Mugs use, we used the WordPress API to pull user data from the Ugly Mugs website, and then we basically created equivalent users in the Pass platform as well. We faced a bit of a convoluted process in terms of authentication and logging in for the Safety Nets app. Basically, you have to log in via WordPress first, and then we have to log in once it is successful. If you log in successfully via WordPress, we then log you in to the equivalent Pass user account. So there's basically 3 steps to the authentication. One other challenge we faced is the push notifications and their complexity. The app itself, you can set up various alert preferences according to your gender, or your alert type, which are basically street, business, client's house, or worker house. That's basically where the incident took place, and the proximity to your current location. You can set up various preferences according to which ones you want to receive. So if you're a female sex worker, you may only want to receive alerts from other females. The same applies to transgender and male sex workers. But in order to achieve that, we had to push their preferences to the cloud, particularly on the iOS side. You can't just send it out. You can't just send out the alert to all users, because the app can't decide whether or not you see the alert once it comes in. So you have to target the relevant users when you send out the initial alert. On the Android side, we can just send it out to everybody, and then the app can then decide whether or not you should see it. So in terms of iOS, we had to push these alert preferences to the cloud and sync them that way, so that we only send it to the relevant subset of users. We used something called Pass Cloud Code to implement the push notifications. Cloud code is basically something that allows us prevents us from having to write server-side code on our own servers. Pass provides a database, but it also provides us with a JavaScript API for writing queries, which were useful here. So we basically ran a series of queries to determine which users were suitable to receive each set of alerts, and those alerts then sent in batches of 1,000. So I mean, I don't know if anybody's used Node.js, but that's basically, it's similar in nature to a lot of Node projects that are out there. And yeah, so we use Pass Cloud Code to actually send the alerts themselves. And that's basically my lot. So we're moving on to a Q&A, presumably now, are we?
I think we'll do a round of applause. So thank you very much to everybody who gave some really valuable insights into the project and how it came about, and some of the challenges faced from a design and development point of view. So we'll do a Q&A. Do you want to sit, stand? Would you like me to move these chairs out for you? You could have a seat.
This one's a bit hidden there.
Do you want to have a seat? Yeah. Come on. Let's get you sat down. I've got loads of questions, but this isn't all about me. So has anyone got any questions for anyone about any aspect?
How long did the project take from inception, like the first very idea, right to actually having this product now?
Gosh, I remember recording something in the old office, that infographic. I don't really know
over 18 months.
Yeah.
But that is literally from initial ideas that we were kind of writing on the back of Post-its to something that is essentially a fairly fully fleshed out now, that is kind of in a closed people situation. So.
Would you say that's kind of like an average sort of time that you would spend on something like this, or?
No, it probably took a bit longer because it was A, it wasn't a client brief, where you are guided by deadlines and budgets and milestones, whereas this was very much an organic kind of internal ideation process that then became something around how on earth do we fund this, because it's not, none of our clients are going to go, sex workers can't afford, or it's statistically impossible for them to gang together and decide they want an app. So, hence, so I mean, it would be great, and there are sex workers unions out there, but it's also one of those things that one of our aims was driving digital disruption in a positive way. So it means that it's with all good disruption projects, it's almost like the end user or the service user doesn't actually realize the benefits of what they're doing. So it has to be kind of led from the other direction. So it was probably more protracted by the fact that we had to A, think up the idea, B, seek funding, C, do all the technical scoping and so on, and then find the best way of bringing it to market. So it's probably way more convoluted than a standard app project would be. But having said that, I think we've made really good progress, considering that there's no template, there was no route to market, there was no product.
Okay, I spent until 3 years ago 15 years in Los Angeles making video games, consoles and apps, and everything had a global emphasis on it because we were selling PlayStation games, Xbox games around the planet. And I'm just wondering, do you have aspirations to take it into different countries like Europe with different languages and the Americas?
I went to a sex worker conference that happened in Vienna, and met sex worker academics and workers and organisations from across the world, and they were all incredibly interested in this. Cool. And all want it to happen. The only barrier at the minute is the fact that this is linked to National Locally Mugs, which is a UK-based organisation that does the whole registering the users, which is a massively important part of the entire system, because it has to be secure. We can't get people on here who aren't sex workers, who could be the dodgy punters that we're trying to alert people about. So that's going to be, it's finding that organisation in each country that can partner with it to do that. Yeah,
so you can't sort of, much as we'd like to, we can't sort of march into Europe without having that kind of system of checks and balances that National Locally Mugs kind of provides us.
Yeah.
So that's where we have to be careful. But you're right, the underlying principle is absolutely, there is a need for this everywhere, from the UK to Western Europe, to Eastern Europe, to North and South America, to Asia. Yeah. This is something that is fairly universal.
Yeah, so, we're even thinking, you touched on different languages. We're considering the process of having different languages even in this country, because we found during the research that a lot of the street sex workers' first language wasn't English. That's why it's very icon-based as well, to get over that for now. But definitely different languages is something to consider in future development.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting conversation, probably not for today, but there's a wider thing here about the universality of app interfaces and UX and stuff like that. So that is quite an interesting thing to consider as well, because essentially you're creating a universal product without any kind of ingrained cultural constraints, from a kind of design perspective.
It's like Tinder that uses a Facebook login as their access point. Yeah.
Exactly. We won't be doing that.
On the theme of making it universal and maybe crossing language barriers, have you considered having maybe just some default responses, maybe like selection of up to 10?
Yes.
So someone could just click a button, in an emergency.
So, do you mean a certain type of attack, or
it's like this is an immediate danger, I just escaped being attacked, and then another one, let's say much less severe, like a group of very dodgy looking guys, so literally you would just have to flick and press that button rather than spend time typing, and that would save any translation issue, because someone picked the app, it was in their language, you'd already have that translation there.
I wasn't so much part of this, but I know that one of the reasons we didn't do that was for fear of getting inaccurate and lazy alerts, which would be, they'd be kind of useless.
It's a bit like a Facebook-like, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's like lazy interaction.
Yeah.
It is, and you're being you're just being kind of unnaturally prescriptive in a situation where you don't need to be. I mean, Holly's absolutely right. There was some protracted research and kind of to and froing about whether we should have some kind of drop down with a number of options, but actually we found that that wasn't really.
Another positive of that is that MASH, Manchester Action on Street Health, who we worked with quite a lot to understand how the reports were made, said that when they do the board with the laminated little piece of paper, they often have to sit with the victim and go through it and try and get the right types of information from them that is going to be helpful ongoing. So we've got little alerts, haven't we, little tips at the bottom of information to include, because they said that might be a good thing to try and prompt appropriate responses.
We're working on some stuff at the moment, trying out different things. One of them is to have a screen showing an example of a good alert, something that would be useful, which you'd only see once. So we're still working on that. But yeah, as Farouk and Beck said, the drop down thing, it actually made it more complicated when you got down to it, the amount of different options and different nuances. Yeah. Each
alert does go off to national ugly mugs, and you get the option to send it off to the police as well when you create each alert. So the more detail, possibly the better each time. If it's going to go off to the police, then obviously need as much detail as possible.
Horizontal detail.
Oh yeah, the discretion of whoever was attacked.
Indeed, yeah.
Any other questions?
I think it's really cool that you're making an app for a group that's normally really sort of disenfranchised and isolated and just not catered for at all in the tech market. And I wondered if you see any wider applications for other similar groups now you've kind of figured out this quite simple interface.
We have sort of potentially considered where this could go, and there has been some kind of very embryonic interest around, for example, people who are refugees in conflict zones, for example, where at its core there's a real-time kind of closed, secure messaging network. So there's lots of potential applications. We've also been considering whether housing associations, for example, there's more of an emphasis on those guys to keep their kind of housing estates safe and provide a system where service users and service providers can work together to create a system of alerts around vandalism and so on. So yeah, there are other areas, but we're certainly guided by, like you rightly say, the need to point this towards those people who are marginalised and most in need of services, where it's one of those things that tech is really good at creating stuff, but quite frankly just making lots of really clever apps that allow fairly affluent 20-somethings in San Francisco to have better lifestyles is not really what we should be using all this amazing technology for. So if we can use it to protect sex workers or people in housing associations or people facing financial problems, then actually that to us is a far better outcome than something that startup Silicon Valley type cliches might go on about and get more rounds of venture capital funding for.
Yes.
Right. I know you said there wasn't much information when you made the decisions for the transgender group. But how come you chose only one group? Would all transgenders have the similar preferences?
Yeah.
In terms of who they would fear or not?
Yeah. That was prescribed to us by Ugly Mugs, I think. Yeah. So that wasn't a decision we made, and I totally understand where you're coming from. As I was writing my presentation, it really sort of hit me. Yeah. But that was a decision that wasn't in our hands.
Yeah, it wasn't a decision that we, as a digital agency, were qualified to make. Whereas National Ugly Mugs, obviously, who had experience working with sex workers, completely at the coalface. But we were happy to take that counsel on this. But yeah, you're right. It is more complicated than reducing it to three filters on an app.
Yeah, I do like the little nuance we've put. I think we said, what you identify as, and I think those little nuances were really, really important.
I've got a quick question. So I think you were speaking a lot about feedback and getting feedback and needing feedback. How does that process work? the getting of feedback? Do you have specific people that you're dealing with, or
Well,
like...
I think our partnership with National Anti-Mites, we're essentially plugging into an existing network that they've been working with, that they've been kind of nurturing and helping for ages. So a lot of it is, it isn't the kind of thing that we can get sort of usability feedback through a CRM system, for example. In many ways, it's a lot more kind of old school word of mouth, because our end users are people who don't really want that spotlight shining upon them. And they don't want to be seen as sort of, obviously they don't want to see them as guinea pigs, but they don't want to volunteer information.
Yeah.
That's something we found out in the whole kind of design and development process, that we talked about setting up workshops and finding about UX, okay, but actually surprise surprise, if you set up a workshop for 30 prostitutes, none of them are going to turn up, because they're losing business, or they just don't want to be identified as such. So our team had to go out there to saunas and brothels and massage parlors and stand on dark street corners and get the kind of feedback that, like Holly said, allowed us to actually realize, oh yeah, the background should be black rather than white, because traditional wisdom and sort of accessibility rules say it should be white with black text, but actually there's a more important overriding concern here, which is that this app turns into a torch and someone beats the crap out of someone. Right? So it is kind of it is still very much working those relationships that have been the result of years of kind of hard work on the part of ugly mites, and it's building that trust and then hoping that becomes an effective communication mechanism for us.
Yeah, unfortunately Joe couldn't be here today, but Joe did most of the actual research and go into brothels and hanging out with the sex workers, and she has some interesting stories from that, as you do imagine. But the main interesting stories for me was that they're like you and me, and that sounds really like, I thought I was quite like liberal and understanding, and thought, yeah, I know that prostitutes are just like normal people, but they actually are. They have like kitchens in the brothels, and nobody does the dishes, just like in any other office. And that's my favourite story. I'm like, oh yeah, and that really hit home. And it's like, they're a really diverse group of people, and we shouldn't be like just clumping them into our predefined thoughts about what a sex worker is.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and something that I think we didn't mention, because we're focusing very much on the safety aspect, but actually it doesn't have to be used for, alerts and danger. So, that old notice board I pointed to, obviously that was about threats and previous incidents of, sort of negative things like violence, but actually they also used it to swap recipes and so on. And similarly with safety nets, you can, not every alert is bad news. You could send a recipe, you could just use it as more of an informal social network. So maybe a byproduct of this is not only preventing violence and keeping things safe, but fostering more of a sense of community and expanding that network, that I was talking about before, and making it, if that helps bring it into a more digital era, that's a good thing. But over and above that, it's about kind of fostering friendships and fostering community amongst a section of the population where that, for many reasons, that they've just not been able to do that.
Any more questions? Yeah.
What sort of security considerations you had to put in place?
Quite a lot, actually. I mean, the whole data thing is probably something we could talk about for hours, so let's not. But essentially, that was, privacy is key, okay? And this is not a data slurping exercise. This is not a data collation exercise. We're not interested in the data. So we are using quite a complex federated data structure, which means that this doesn't end up anywhere, essentially. Okay, it is in the cloud and it dissipates. We're not interested in the ownership of that. It's not with us. It's not with National Anti-Mites. This is all about keeping users safe and facilitating their lives in the real world. So yes, a lot of work was done, but to ensure that we actually convert. Weirdly, when you're talking about digital and apps and user bases, and it's all about working in the opposite direction. So we have this really amazing way of filtering this data and segmenting audiences and user bases. We have done the opposite of that. Okay, we're not interested in the data. It shouldn't belong to anyone, and it doesn't.
Yeah, another interesting security issue was that obviously a lot of sex workers might go home to an abusive home situation, so need to turn the app off very quickly, so that these alerts aren't going on my phone, and somebody who they might not want them to know is a prostitute at all, or so the off button, we decided to put that on the home screen.
Yeah, to turn the notifications
so it's
off
really a
quickly.
quick thing to do.
Did you have any, when you were designing, I thought it was really interesting that you made the colour scheme such a primary kind of consideration. And I was just wondering, was there any thought about making it really specifically like gender neutral, or were you worried about that a certain interface might not make it kind of attractive to people? Because whatever the app is used for, when you first open that home screen, if you don't really like the way it looks, you kind of, there's a massive high proportion of apps that get immediately deleted, aren't there? I just wondered, was that a consideration at all in terms of gender balance, people be using it or anything like that?
I wasn't actually the one that chose this colour scheme, apart from the decision to make it dark. And then I think, well, the only other colour in it really is the red, which has pretty much just been taken from the Wikilogs logo, as it's sort of their app as well.
Probably also this kind of subliminal link with danger and alerts.
It was
those universal things.
The other designer, Adam, created the sort of app icon, which then influenced the design of the app itself. So I didn't actually ask him why he chose that colour. I just went with it.
Anything else?
Interested if the police were interested in this app as well, because obviously some of that data is going to be interesting to them. I mean, I lived in Suffolk at the time that those dreadful murders were happening, and I just wonder, what the police would get out of this.
I have a few thoughts on this. So the police aren't very cooperative generally to sex workers that we've met. And part of the reason this app exists is because they're not particularly helpful. Some police forces are better than others. So Hull is terrible for sex workers and just takes this whole they're just evil people stance, and it's really, really bad. Whereas Liverpool is actually amazing and takes this real protection route, and it's been like that for a long time in Liverpool, and they're really forward thinking about it. So I'd imagine like Liverpool police might be interested in taking something like this on, but then we've got to worry about what sex workers are going to think if police are actually actively involved in the app. That's why the ability to send the alert to the police is completely optional, and it's really clear that that's an optional thing and that the police aren't involved with the app.
I do really like that you've really, really thought about it from the user's perspective rather than, because I remember reading about the Samaritans app, where it's kind of a sort of flag every interaction you had as suicide risk is blah blah blah, and it's it's giving the control completely back to the
it's very grassroots, and I don't think it'd work in any other way really.
No.
Knowing the users as we do now.
There's also an option to send the alert anonymous. Thank you. Yeah, so they have the option to send that information.
Yeah, I've got a really interesting question actually at another talk about how you could potentially use the alert data to predict when there might be an attacker. And as a data person, I thought that sounded absolutely amazing. But obviously we're just not going to do that because it's just compromising the whole concept of the app. Even if we could potentially stop bigger things by analysing that data, I don't think where we're going with it.
So I think that pretty much concludes it, but please do stick around and have another drink with us, and I'm sure the guys from Reason Digital will be around for a little while longer if anyone does want to have a chat to them. But please join me in another round of applause. Thank you very much. That's been really Now go and get a refill quick.